If you have a Mexican friend or have interacted with a Mexican person in your life, there is a very strong chance that person has shared a meme or a photo of El Chavo del Ocho. And in case they haven't, they're not real Mexicans, they're lying to you, and you should get rid of them right now.
I haven't watched El Chavo del Ocho.
Oh! You're dead, Isaiah. Oh wait, never mind, he's not Mexican, he's from El Salvador. Oh, well, sorry for killing you, man.
I mean, that shouldn't come as a surprise. This show was such a massive success that even after 50 years, it remains in the hearts of many Latinos all around the world, thanks to its clever jokes, fantastic humor, and lovable yet relatable cast of characters.
In case it wasn't obvious, I'm a huge fan of this show. I mean, why else will I talk about the Mexican sitcom on a gaming channel? Because I love it so much. This show represents for me tons of laughs and many fantastic memories. And besides, maybe some of you from non-Latino communities might be interested in learning something new about different cultures. So let me present to you El Chavo del Ocho.
So, what is this show about? El Chavo del Ocho follows the daily lives of a group of people who live together in a neighborhood, mainly focusing on the titular character El Chavo, an 8-year-old kid who lives inside of a barrel. And before anyone asks, yes, all the kids are full-grown adults. And yes, that's very common in Mexico. And together with his friends, they'll play pranks on the other residents, causing conflicts and misunderstandings between them. The show has so many iconic and memorable characters, such as Kiko, a selfish and envious kid with huge cheeks and easily one of the funniest characters in the whole show. La Chilindrina, a mischievous girl who is always cooking trouble. Don Ramon, a lazy unemployed guy who is always avoiding paying the landlord 14 months of rent. Doña Florinda, a snobbish woman who sees the other neighbors as lesser and is in love with El Profesor Girafales, the teacher of the school the kids go to, and is also in love with Doña Florinda. Doña Clotilde, also referred to La Bruja del 71, a single old woman that the kids are afraid of. And finally, El Señor Barriga, the landlord who is always chasing after Don Ramon and is constantly getting hit by the kids. And many, many more characters that I won't talk about. What makes El Chavo so special is that it is a very down-to-earth show. Like, yeah, it tends to have some fantasy elements every now and then, but it is so cool how it can take an extremely simple concept and make an entire episode out of it. You can have an episode where Kiko goes to get a haircut, a simple day at school with all the kids, Don Ramon trying to dry his pants, or El Chavo selling Jamaican aguas frescas that look like lemon but taste like tamarind. Some of my favorite episodes include El Chavo and Kiko getting guitar lessons, El Chavo trying to hunt lizards. The episode where the entire neighborhood goes to Acapulco is extremely memorable. God, the one episode where Don Ramon thinks he's gonna die on his birthday never fails to make me laugh. And what Mexican can forget that fantastic scene where Don Ramon temporarily becomes a teacher? Go! The show was born from the mind of comedian and director Roberto Gómez Bolaños, also known as Chespirito, who also had a plethora of other shows such as Doctor Chapatín, Los Chifladitos, El Chapulín Colorado. Okay, you have to know about this guy at least, he was in Fortnite. Chespirito even had his own movie called El Chanfle. El Chavo del Ocho was born from a skit in a show also called Chespirito in 1971. Eventually it evolved into its own show that ran all the way to 1980. This show lasted almost 10 years! By being aired during prime time, it got such a massive success that it will get 350 million of watchers every week. And it wasn't just Mexico that fell in love with the show. The rest of Latin America will soon become fans too, as it will expand to Guatemala, Puerto Rico, Ecuador, and of course, Brazil, who are also massive fans of the show. And no, I'm serious, they really love El Chavo del Ocho, or as they call it, Chaves, since it got an entire dub in Portuguese. Actually, even more impressive is the fact that this show was distributed and translated to other countries outside of Latin America, such as the US, Spain, France, Greece, and even Russia. But of course, most of these localizations have been lost to time. Even though El Chavo del Ocho ended in the 80s, the show will continue to be constantly aired. It was known that by 2011, 20 different countries still transmitted it. I mean, think about it. This show from the 70s that ended in the 80s was such a success that it survived all the way to the early 2000s. My earliest memory of watching the show. I grew up with it because they will still show it on TV. And even though I was born in 1998, I still love the hell out of it. Let me tell you something. When I was very young, I had this mentality of, if it's not animated, then it's a no-watch from me. Eventually, as I grew up, I ended up falling in love with more live-action shows, such as Kenan and Kel, Ned's The Classified Guide, Drake and Josh, and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But El Chavo del Ocho is the only show I recall loving since I have memory, and it was all because of its unparalleled comedy. It's way too funny. This is a show that knows how to use slapstick comedy, double entendre, clever jokes, and even outright violence. But one of its biggest strengths is that anyone can relate to it. It doesn't matter what year you were born in or where do you live. El Chavo is such a down-to-earth show most of the time that it's hard not to get attached to the characters. You can relate to Don Ramon in how he always avoids paying rent, or in his iconic phrase, "There's no bad work. The bad thing is having to work." You probably know someone like Doña Florinda, someone who is always in conflict with everyone and believes to be a high-class person. Or maybe you once met a kid like El Chavo, Kiko, or La Chilindrina. It's a show that reflects how many Latinos live day by day, and there's something magical about it. However, does that mean that it was perfect? Oh no, not at all! I think one of its main problems is that it has too many repetitive jokes. Yes, there are recurring jokes, and that's totally fine. But other jokes are played out so often and are stretched out so much, you start to lose your patience a bit. It's also at fault of sometimes having the characters be too, but way too stupid to try to deliver a joke, which ends up being more frustrating rather than funny. And just like any long-running show, eventually it began to grow a bit stale. It also didn't help that many iconic characters left. Actually, I wanna challenge you guys to something. Ask any Chavo del Ocho fan who their favorite character is, and the answers will always be the same: Don Ramon and Kiko. These two easily stole the entire show, no question about it. But eventually Kiko left the show, and his actor got into legal trouble for taking the character to make his own show, Federico, followed by a sequel called Ay que Kiko. Don Ramon left the show due to personal issues, but also ended up working with Kiko on the already mentioned shows. He eventually returned to El Chavo in one of the most emotional scenes in the entire show, but not too long after that, he passed away due to cancer. They really tried to keep El Chavo afloat by bringing back other characters more often, while also making up new ones. I can't say the show got terrible by any means, but it just wasn't the same anymore because Don Ramon and Kiko were just that special to the show, and any episode that had both of them together were easily the best ones. Also, I don't know if this was common practice back in the day, but El Chavo is one of those shows where you have one episode, right? And said episode will have like 3 or 5 different versions, and I'm not kidding! Say you have the episode of Los Globos, one of the most iconic ones. You have the 1972 version, and then the 1974 version where La Chilindrina is not there. But in 1976, she returned and the episode was expanded. Then, in 1980, Kiko and Don Ramon left the show already, and they were replaced. I've never heard of any other show who has done stuff like that, but for El Chavo, that was very common. I mean, they're still good episodes, but I don't think we needed that many versions of the same story. One more bad thing about El Chavo is that it does have content that might not be well seen for today's standards. It's not full-on offensive stuff by any means, but for example, there's a ton, and I mean a ton of fat jokes against El Señor Barriga due to his obesity, to the point where the jokes also become annoying. There's the occasional violence against children, and well, there's an episode where Don Ramon pretends to be mentally ill just to not pay the rent. Again, it's not fully offensive stuff in general, but it's something I noticed in recent rewatches. But honestly, for a 70s show, it's surprising how you can barely find any content that many may consider offensive. Thanks to its massive success, El Chavo got tons of merchandise, such as toys, lunchboxes, cereals, and sweets. Eventually, in the mid-2000s, it got its own cartoon referred to by fans as El Chavo Animado, which had dubious quality, which I'll get to later. This cartoon also spawned its own set of merchandise, including a stage play, collaborations with McDonald's, and most importantly, video games. I've talked about them before, but damn, I never tire about mentioning them. El Chavo on the Wii is pretty bad and barely works if I am honest. I love its presentation and how it's filled with Mexican folklore. Too bad it's still a bad game. This clip from 2018 is all you need to know my feelings about it.
I paid 150 pesos and I still feel I was scammed.
But El Chavo card is genuinely great, like, I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I honestly can't call it a full Mario Kart clone cause it does so many things that make it stand out on its own. It just needed more time in the oven and making the characters more unique. But overall, this is a great time that I fully recommend. That is, if you can get your hands on it, because the price... yeah, this is not a very accessible game now, sadly. But back to the cartoon topic. El Chavo Animado was weird because it has good qualities. For one, I love the character designs. I mean, it's cool that the kids actually look like kids, because in the show, they're played by 30, 40-year-old adults. Second, every single character perfectly transitioned into this art style, while they all retain what made them so iconic in the show. And personally speaking, I think the first season of this cartoon is solid for what it is. They're all episodes based on stories from the original show, but with more over-the-top sequences that reflect the imagination of the kids. But as more seasons went on, they just started to make up their own stories, which isn't a bad thing per se, but they just went a bit too overboard, with taking El Chavo to space, to Egypt, and to a safari with insanely racist depictions of black people. And I wish I had made that up, but no, that actually happened. And again, it sucks because, as I said earlier, the magic of El Chavo is that it's so down to earth that anyone can relate to it, and the cartoon went too far away from that idea. But hey, I guess it worked for them in the end because this cartoon ended up having 7 seasons. Almost 10 years, just like the original show. Also, fun fact, this cartoon also has an English dub that is way easier to find. But the craziest part about it is the voice cast. Tara Platt, Edelgard Fire Emblem lent her voice to this show, and that's not all. They got Yuri Lowenthal too, it's crazy! I still don't know how to feel about the fact that Ñoño shares voices with Marth Fire Emblem and the other 500 characters Yuri Lowenthal voices! El Chavo del Ocho wasn't just a great show, it was something that left a mark on many of us and stood up against the test of time. It's still watchable even today. And I want to go as far as to say it's even part of Latino culture. It left such a print in the world that it's become part of our everyday talking. I've had friends, family, and even myself use phrases from El Chavo in our daily talking, either as jokes, memes, or just instinctively using them in a regular conversation without thinking about it. I myself like to throw a little reference to the show every now and then on the videos. And in the rest of the world, these characters are just as beloved as they were back in the day. There's a restaurant inspired by the neighborhood in Mexico City. In 2012, Mexico made a massive homage to celebrate Chespirito. In 2010, El Salvador used Don Ramon as a poster boy for a civil campaign. Brazil has done its own video games inspired by properties of Chespirito, which I've talked about before. One of the earliest fan games I ever found was Street Chavez, a Street Fighter clone with El Chavo del Ocho characters. And even to this day, El Chapulín Colorado has gotten homages in Fortnite, Fall Guys, and most recently, the movie Blue Beetle. The only problem about this, at least at the time of this video, is that the Chespirito group, the owners of the show, are constantly fucking up. In 2020, they pull out the show from most sites over who own the property, and the Chespirito group constantly ends up making horrible projects. They once tried to make a web series that was so bad, And I mean so fucking terrible that everyone hated it on release and was cancelled after just one episode. I can't put into words how awful it was, but it was offensive to watch. They once made an infamous commercial to promote a cable service that didn't even have El Chavo on it. They hyped it up so much that people thought it was gonna be a new show, a movie, or something. But no, it was a shitty commercial.
Eugenio!
And then, other Chespirito family members thought it would be a fantastic idea to make a contest about El Chavo del Ocho NFTs. But just to give you the short version, the story got a happy ending and the contest was another failure. But the worst part about it is that El Chavo del Ocho is so copyright sensitive that you have to be extra careful when showing anything from Chespirito online. That's why I've been mostly using images from the show because I don't wanna risk it. And it sucks because El Chavo del Ocho is a genuinely fantastic show. It's not perfect, but it still has excellent comedy, amazing characters, and even beautiful messages about being humble and kind towards others. And it's through this show that I had tons of laughs, but most importantly, memories with my late father. One of the most beautiful memories I have of him is just sitting right next to him to watch El Chavo del Ocho. No matter if it was an episode we had already watched 7 times, we will still laugh a lot, and I even recall my mom would call us pair of dummies just because we still found El Chavo extremely funny. It's those little moments that mark you for life, and that is one of the many things El Chavo did for me. And I have no doubt other Latinos around the world have similar experiences with this show just as I did.
Realistically speaking, given the current situation of greedy corporations and how people consume media nowadays, people are slowly starting to forget about El Chavo. And that makes me sad because, personally, I would love to see this show be as successful as it was before 2020. Sure, I don't expect it to be the huge success that it was back in the day. But people deserve access to El Chavo del Ocho and the rest of the legacy that Chespirito left for us. These shows are still great and still have something to offer nowadays. And people will no doubt can still get something out of them. Whether it be a new phrase to use with your family or friends, a good laugh, or maybe a pretty memory. El Chavo did that for me, and I have no doubt it can still do the same for other people. But anyway, now tell me, what do you think about El Chavo del Ocho? Did you know about it already? Do you have a beautiful memory you want to share with us? Actually, what I also really want to know, which episode is your favorite? Please let me know in the comments, and while you do that, thank you so much for your time. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and you know the drill. If you want to support the channel, you know, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, or Patreon, wink wink wink, that will mean a lot to me. Have a wonderful day, and take care! I'll see you next time!